This was the moment I started questioning whether or not I took on more than I could handle with demoing my fireplace. Keep watching to see how it turns out. Hey DIY friends, ready to transform your living space without breaking the bank? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Stephanie from Home with the Daniels. I'm here to empower you to turn your Pinterest dreams into reality one project at a time. Join me for budget-friendly tips and tutorials. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to tap the notification bell and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get started. Welcome back DIY friends. I'm so excited to share with you all my DIY concrete fireplace transformation. I'll show you how I took it from this to this fireplace that you see behind me. So in this video, I'll focus on how I DIY the concrete fireplace, and in the next video, I'll share with you all how I built this cabinet right here and this floating shelf, and also information on this wall. So I built this entire cabinet from scratch. It was really easy to do, so I'll be showing you that in the next video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Today, I'm showing you how I transformed my fireplace from this to that for just under $200. And as always, you can find all the links and step-by-step instruction in the blog post linked below. All right, let's get started. First up, the least fun part, emptying and cleaning out the area. Before we can dive into the exciting stuff, we need a clean, clutter-free workspace. So I'm cleaning out everything around the fireplace, including all of my emotional support plant babies, and giving it a good wipe down to remove any dust or debris. Since I'm also giving the corner next to the fireplace a makeover, I went ahead and removed all the shelves and the wood shiplap. Don't worry, I'll be sharing the details of this corner transformation in separate videos, so stay tuned for that. Now it's time to remove the old mantle, and it was looking kind of rough, y'all, so it was definitely time to replace it with something else. First, I carefully inspected how it was attached to the wall. In this case, it was secured with a few nails hidden behind the caulk and paint. I used a utility knife to score along the edges and break the caulk. I never know how to say this, but this makes it easier to remove without damaging the wall. Next, I used my self-prying bar to gently pry the mantle away from the wall. This thing was really stuck in there, so I really had to put my back into it to remove it from the wall. And just like that, the mantle is finally off after all that work. Now we're ready to move on to the next step. When I started inspecting the stone to figure out how to remove it, I quickly noticed something. Some of the pieces were super loose. You gotta love those home builders that cut corners, right? I couldn't help but laugh. It's one of those moments when you discover something unexpected in your home and you just have to shake your head and laugh it off. I started with a prying bar to remove all the pieces that were already pretty loose. Turns out that ended up being more than half of the stone on the fireplace. It should not have been that easy for me to remove them. I removed all the pieces that were super easy to remove, and now I think I'll probably need to rent a hammer drill or get like a chisel, see if I'll be able to take these out. But because these pieces are pretty big, I probably will end up needing a chisel. I mean, not a chisel, a hammer drill. I think they're really in there though. I think it's probably cement on the bottom. I think we're gonna have to get something to like break these down.
Can I get the knee pad? There's the knee pad.
After working on the smaller loose pieces, I decided to wait for my husband to get home to help with the larger, more stubborn pieces of stone. We grabbed the sledgehammer and chisel to break them apart. He definitely had to put his back into it, but slowly we managed to remove those big chunks. Honestly, we had way too much fun tearing this down. It became somewhat of a workout. It took us about an hour to tear it all down completely. At this point, there was definitely no turning back now. We tried our best not to damage the drywall, but it was nearly impossible since the cement was applied directly to it. We debated patching up the drywall after, but ultimately decided to leave it as is because we were going to cover it with cement boards anyways. Next up, I had to relocate the light switch and outlet to the other side of the wall since I'm planning to extend the fireplace face and it would just be in the way. First, I turned off the power to the room at the breaker. Always safety first. Then I carefully removed the light switch by unscrewing the switch from the wall. One piece of advice, be sure to take pictures and videos of exactly how the wiring looks like before unhooking anything. Trust me, don't be like us. We skipped this step and didn't take good enough pictures, and it took us hours to figure it out. We had to saw off the screws holding the electrical box in place to get it out. Unfortunately, we couldn't reuse that box, so we had to grab an old work switch box instead. This type of box is perfect for use after drywall has already been installed. It has a built-in clamp and is ideal for adding new outlets to pre-existing walls. Here's a quick clip of us installing the new light switch. First, we traced the new box on the wall with a pencil and used a flush cut saw and utility knife to make a hole for the box on the drywall. Luckily, the wire was long enough to move it to the other side without any trouble. After removing the light switch, I had to patch up the hole on the wall using joint compound and drywall tape. This is pretty easy to do, it just requires some practice for the wall to look smooth. If you want more details on how to do this, check out my video on how to patch a hole in the wall. Next up, I needed to cut into the floor to make space for the fireplace frame. This step is especially important if you have LVP floors, as you want to ensure the floors can expand and contract properly. After marking where I will be cutting, I used a circular saw set to the correct depth as well as a saw track to help me make straight cuts. Once the cuts were complete, I removed the section of LVP flooring. There was also a layer of glued down flooring under it, which we had to scrape off using a scraper and a hammer to fully prep that area. With the floors cleared and prepped, it was finally time to move on to building the fireplace frame. I started with the base using 2x4s to create a solid foundation. I connected the pieces with a combination of pocket hole screws, and wood screws to ensure it was sturdy enough to support the new fireplace design. After the base was built, I carefully positioned it to fit onto the floor opening, making sure it lined up perfectly with a cutout in the subfloor. I also made sure to leave a small gap between the base and the LVP floor to allow for expansion and contraction. This is important, if not, your floors could possibly buckle if you don't do this. Once I made sure everything fit, I was ready to start framing the rest of the fireplace. Moving on to the sides and top of the frame, I measured and cut more 2x4 to fit the exact dimension of the fireplace area. In the 3D model I'm showing you here, you can see the overall measurements for my fireplace setup so you can get an idea of the scale. Instead of putting together the entire frame against the wall in one go, I decided to build it in sections. This allowed me to align the horizontal piece with the studs on the wall to make sure this was secure. Each section was connected with pocket holes and pocket hole screws for a clean and secure fit. I put the pieces together using pocket holes and screws and used clamps to keep everything straight while I drilled in the screws. The clamps really helped to keep things in place and made the whole process a lot easier. My assistant helped me out with this part and it took us about 2 hours to finish. If you're wondering what I'm talking about whenever I mention pocket holes, don't worry, I've got you covered. Here's a quick look on how to make them. You need a pocket hole jig and a drill. And I also have a full video on pocket holes coming soon, so stay tuned for that where you get all the details on how to make them, the different jigs that they have, and when you should use them. In this clip, I'm securing the frame to the studs on the wall through the horizontal pieces. This is why I mentioned earlier that I made sure to align the horizontal pieces with the stud on the wall. That way I can easily screw them in and secure this in place. The frame is all done. And here's a close-up of it. And you can see at the bottom, I use L brackets to connect the top part to the base, making sure everything is nice and secure. Now time to start adding the cement board to the frame. We cut the cement board using our angle grinder with a carbide blade, which made the process a lot easier, and I'll make sure to link the exact blade we use in the description. But while doing my research, I found out that you can also cut the cement board with a utility knife, by scoring and snapping it. I gave that a shot, but it didn't give me the cleanest cut. However, it's still a decent option if you don't have an angle grinder handy. We took our time measuring and cutting each piece of the cement board one by one and double checking to make sure each piece fit. I made sure to line up the edges of each piece with a 2x4 in the frame so that we had a solid spot to secure the screws. This was not hard, but it was a lot of measuring, a lot of cutting, a lot of walking back and forth from our garage to our living room, and also a lot of dust ever in our garage. So please be sure to wear a protective mask if you're going to be doing this. Once each piece was cut, I attached them to the fireplace frame using cement board screws to make sure everything was nice and secure. You want to make sure to leave a small gap between each cement board to prevent cracking later on. For the front of the base, we made sure not to install the cement boards directly on the floor. So in order to leave an expansion gap for the LVP floors, I used some of my son's playing cards. I stacked 5 cards together and placed them between the cement boards and the floor, and it worked out perfectly. It felt so good to secure the last piece. This took us about 2 hours to complete between measuring, cutting, and securing it to the frame. And that's it. With the cement boards in place, we're ready to move on to the next step of this project. But before we do, here's a close-up of how the cement boards look on the frame. Now it's time to apply the cement board joint tape. I used a fiberglass mesh tape designed specifically for cement boards. I will be sure to link the one I used in the description below. I applied the fiberglass mesh tape along all of the seams, making sure it was pressed down firmly. I also made sure to cover the fireplace with painter's tape and plastic to protect it from any cement while we worked. This step can be annoying and it's honestly my least favorite part, but it saves you a ton of cleanup time later, so it's definitely worth it to do. Here's a close-up of the joint tape on the cement board. We spread the thin set all over the joints on top of the mesh tape using a putty knife. Here's a quick sped up time lapse of us adding the thin set to the joints. And also added the thin set to the corner beads to help glue them in place. As we worked, we cut each corner bead to size to make sure it fit perfectly before applying the thin set. We also applied an extra layer of thin set on top of each corner bead. Then I realized I didn't get enough corner beads, so we ended up calling it a night. So this is your reminder to double check your materials before starting. Day 2 of thin set and corner bead. I mixed up a fresh batch of thin set according to the package directions. Here's a close-up of what it looks like once it's mixed. It has a thick, smooth consistency. I started applying the thin set to the corner beads with a putty knife. But halfway through I realized it was way easier to just do it with my hands to spread it evenly. So that's what you see me doing there. I just made sure to wear gloves and it made life so much easier. It was messy, but a lot easier. Here's a time lapse of me finishing up the rest of the corner beads and adding more thin set. For some reason, the corner of that corner bead was just giving me a headache and it just did not want to lay flat. So I ended up removing it, scraping most of the thin set that had already dried off, and cut a new piece of corner bead to fit. And I continued with doing the same thing, apply thin set on the inside of the corner bead as well as on top of it once it was on the fireplace. These corner beads is what will ensure that you have a smooth corners around your fireplace face. They're actually the same corner beads that they use for drywall. They have different type, vinyl or this paper-like one, and they also sell metal corner beads as well. I decided to go with the paper-like one that you see here. It seemed to be the easiest to work with after doing some research. All of the joints and corners are covered, so now I need to sand down this thin set. I probably applied this way too thick, a lot thicker than I needed to, but that's okay. It should not take too long to sand, but I guess we're about to find out now. I scraped some of the excess thin set with a putty knife, which was surprisingly easy to do. This was my first time working with thin set, so I was not sure what to expect. I was thinking it was as hard as concrete, but it's definitely softer. After scraping most of it, I sanded down the rest of the high spots. Just be sure to wear a mask when doing this because it creates dust everywhere. I definitely could have applied a thinner layer of thin set, which would have not needed all this sanding. After all that sanding, it was time to sweep and vacuum all that dust from the sanding before applying the concrete. Now for the fun part, applying the concrete mixture. I made sure to mix it in small batches to prevent it from drying out too quickly because this stuff dries super fast. Working from top to bottom, I applied the concrete in small sections using a putty knife. The goal for the first layer was to even out any high spots from the thin set, creating a nice smooth surface for the final finish. The first layer was definitely me trying a lot of different techniques to different size putty knives to see what was more comfortable. After the first layer, I did end up adding a little bit more water to the concrete mix. I did not mix it based on the package direction because I was not using it for what it's meant for. So I definitely found that a mixture that was closer to pancake batter consistency was definitely easier to apply. It took about 2 hours to apply the first layer. It was definitely time consuming, a lot longer than I expected. So now here's a time lapse of the process of applying the first coat of cement. I also ended up using a spray bottle to help smooth out the cement mixture. I recommend using a mist bottle instead of a squirt spray bottle for a more even finish. I made sure to link with the one I used in the description below. I let the first layer dry for about 24 hours before tackling the second layer, so I pretty much did the same thing. The best way I found to apply the concrete mixture is to use long even strokes with minimal pressure at first, just to spread the mixture evenly. Then as I work my way towards the edges, I apply a little more pressure to feather it out and give it that smooth finish. This took another 2 hours to do, so here's a time lapse of the entire process, which is basically identical to the first time I applied it. Now time for the third and final layer. After letting the second layer dry for about 24 hours, we came back to apply the final coat. This time it only took us about an hour since it was the both of us tackling this. This layer is all about getting that perfect smooth finish, so we took our time spreading the cement mixture carefully to make it even and seamless. We did end up needing an extra box of cement mixture to get a full coverage. But if you're not making your fireplace face as big as we did ours, one box will probably be more than enough. And here's a time lapse of the process, which was essentially the same as the previous 2 coats. We just made sure to take our time to smooth everything out since this was going to be the final layer. Now for the most satisfying part, removing the tape and the protective plastic because it means that we're done. So I originally planned on sanding after the final coat, but I ended up liking some of the natural imperfection from the cement strokes, so I decided to leave it as is. And eventually I'll seal this cement to protect it. I just need to find a matte sealer that won't change the color of the finish. And here's a close-up of what it looks like. Now it's time to put the mantle together. I used solid red oak and made it about 5 inches thick for a nice substantial look. Put it together using pocket holes and wood glue to keep it sturdy. I thought about doing all the edges with 45-degree bevel cuts to give it a seamless wrap look, but I didn't want to risk messing up these nice pieces of red oak, so I only used the bevel cuts for the end cap to give it that finished touch without overcomplicating it and possibly messing up the wood and having to get more. After applying the glue, we just put it together with the pocket hole screws. To hang the mantle above the fireplace, I decided to go with a metal French cleat hanger, which can hold up to 300 pounds. I added a scrap piece of wood to the top and side of the mantle, securing it with pocket holes. This gave me a solid spot to screw the French cleats into, making sure everything was nice and sturdy. The reason why I didn't secure the French cleats directly to the back of the mantle is because it would have left a gap between the mantle and the wall, and that I definitely did not want that. This is definitely a two-person job because this mantle is close to 8 foot long and is heavy, so I had to wait for hubby to get home to help me. I absolutely love how it turned out. I still have a few things left to do, like add the baseboard and stain the cabinet countertop, which hopefully I can get to that before the year is over. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful and that it inspired you.